Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all of you. To the organizers of Africa Down Under, Bill Ripard and the PayDirt team, thanks very much for inviting us to this particular session. It's great to be here. To Dominic as the chair of the session, thanks for inviting me, and I hope I'll be able to do justice to the 20 minutes that you've asked me to speak on the South African situation. To the honourable ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. I think let me start off the presentation by saying we have made some progress in South Africa, but we've still got a lot more to do. And we continue to drive an agenda of #Making Mining Matter. The country does have huge potential. We believe that we can get exploration up to 5% of global total. It's currently sitting at only 1% of the global total. And we can get mining back to above 10% of GDP with obviously significant structural and institutional reforms, which we certainly engage in government on. But unfortunately, we did have the events of the past month where there was a degree of violence, looting, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal, a little bit of Gauteng, and these pictures transported to the rest of the world were obviously gave quite a negative view of South Africa, but obviously they were quite confined to specific certain areas. The events ultimately were brought under control and obviously do relate to some of the challenges the country faces at a social level with high unemployment rates, etc. But mining was less affected by the violence. And we have been engaging and working very closely with the security establishment within South Africa. And there's been a very strong drive towards stabilizing the situation, obviously focusing on how we can get growth back on track. What's also important is that we have a new Minister of Finance. There was a cabinet reshuffle fairly recently. Mr. Enoch Godongwana, very capable man. He's talking growth. We had a meeting with him as organized business on Monday. He came and talked at the Busa AGM, and his pro-growth agenda is very encouraging. This concept of really driving what we need to do from a structural reform perspective. And we have actually seen a couple of structural reforms coming through the economy already. Let me just highlight a couple of them. The first one is we've had a 1% reduction in the corporate tax rate in the February budget. We've had a 51% sale or sale of a 51% equity stake in South African Airways to a private consortium, which means that government are recognizing that they can't run all these different types of businesses. We've even had a increase in the license-free cap for self-generation. That's gone from a 1 megawatt cap to a 100 megawatt cap. And we'll talk about that a bit later. That's obviously a big exemption. And as promised, within 60 days after that announcement by the state president, we've had the regulations come out. And in fact, it looks like it's not just for self-generation. It could be for all types of generation by the private sector. So we obviously got hit very strongly by the COVID pandemic. You'll see in this particular slide, our share of GDP, or mining share of GDP, fell to below 7.5%. We did take roughly an 11% hit to GDP on the mining side. But what's interesting is that because of higher dollar commodity prices and because of a slightly weaker exchange rate, we saw a 24% increase in our export sales last year. And there's no doubt in our mind that the mining sector has played a critical role in bailing out the economy, particularly the fiscus. And the rest of the economy. We've still got 452,000 people at work in the mining sector. We did have a number of those not at work, some 60,000 during the sort of height of the pandemic. But as we've done in all these different circumstances, mining has a risk-based approach to the way that we've managed COVID or any of these particular issues, both preventative and mitigating controls. And on the preventative side, we've done a lot of work in terms of our own 10-point plan and obviously mitigating preventative and mitigating controls being used to manage the pandemic. And as we say, mining has been saving lives and saving livelihoods. We have had some 46,000 cases in the sector. Our levels of testing are very high. More than 50% of our screenings go for testing. And we have had roughly 700 of our colleagues, unfortunately, perishing as a result of COVID, but that gives us a 1% fatality rate compared to the country level fatality rate for people detected with COVID of 3%. So again, obviously we recognize that every life lost in the COVID pandemic has been one too many, but again, we're managing it very carefully. What we have been doing is a huge drive to support our national vaccination initiative. Remember, government is the sole procurer of vaccines. The private sector has not been able to procure any vaccines itself. And so we've been working very closely with government to get 77 vaccination sites within the mining sector running. We've had a whole big campaign around vaccination, which is a campaign around getting the whole country vaccinated, or those who are eligible for vaccinations. And for the first time in the last month, we haven't had a shortage of vaccine supply, as particularly the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines have been flowing more freely, and obviously the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. We've had a strong collaborative approach with our trade unions and with government on what we need to do to get people vaccinated. There has been some degree of vaccine hesitancy, but given the fact that vaccines without a doubt save lives, this has been a kind of like a no-brainer for us. And I think the industry, working with trade unions and government, recognize the criticality and importance of getting as many people vaccinated as possible. At this stage, just to give you the slightly more updated figure, I've just literally received 5 minutes ago. We've got 51 sites operating. We've still got another 16 sites that we want to get registered. It just takes a bit of time to get these registered. We have now vaccinated 145,000 employees. If you add in the vaccination numbers from yesterday, that takes us up to 32% of our total workforce. And our target is to have 80% of the workforce vaccinated by the end of September into the early part of October. So provided the vaccines continue to flow through the vaccine acquisition channels from government, we'll continue to administer the vaccines, and we'll certainly be helping our communities also to get access to the vaccines as soon as we've finished the vaccine processes that we have with our employees. Just to talk very quickly about a leadership role that we are playing. We do have a Women in Mining strategy in the Minerals Council that we've been driving over the course of the last 18 months. We had our first, the launch of our white paper on women in mining back last year. That was in March 2020. We also had the launch of a gender-based violence initiative, basically stop violence. We've got a campaign very strongly driving stop violence and abuse of women. And then what we've also done is we've set up a leadership forum within the Minerals Council, which is led by the Minerals Council President, Nolita Fakodi, and with her co-champion, Paul Dunn, Vice President of the Minerals Council, and lots of work being done about driving it. We have a organizational structure that's been established. We've got a lot of communication taking place within the sector. We have a celebration of women in mining COVID heroes, which we did last year, and we're doing that again this year. We have a set of foundational measures. There are 7 foundational measures that the company is all implementing at the moment. We're defining the role that women are playing in the COVID-19 response. And we are talking a lot about modernization of the sector and how RD&I can play a key role in not only enabling the sector to be more cost competitive, but to enable greater gender diversity and inclusion in the sector. And these are the 7 foundational measures: zero tolerance for gender-based violence through our Stop Abuse campaign, our diversity policies. We've got a reporting system, and we're just about to launch a scorecard. We have programs around initiating unconscious bias training to transform culture within the sector itself. We're doing a company-wide pulse check survey, building an inclusive physical environment, which obviously is a big issue, and obviously making sure that we are supplying the correct PPE designed by women, not designed by men, to make sure that we enable adequate access to PPE in the workplace. So lots of good work done, and we certainly will be reporting on a monthly basis to society on what we're doing in this particular initiative. A couple of areas to focus on. Logistics have become a major constraint. We think that if you look at our total export sales on coal, as an example, we're already down 10 billion this year. So that's because of certain challenges that we are having on the logistical front. We did have a very large gathering of CEOs with the Transnet leadership team last Monday in a very detailed full-day workshop on each of the different corridors. And we're looking at how we can resolve the constraints and improve the performance and get it back to where we need to be for all the different bulk commodity exports, which are obviously iron ore, chrome, manganese, and coal. On the backlogs on permits, in February of this year, the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy did state, and we're very transparent about the fact that there was a 5,000 license backlog. The Minerals Council members, we went through to our members who indicated that this backlog was holding up about 30 to 50 billion rand in investment in the sector. I can report that we have seen some progress made by the department in unlocking and resolving some of the backlog. For example, on the prospecting rights side, more than 500 of the backlog has now been cleared, which is roughly about 25% of the backlog. On mining rights, it's about 10% of the backlog has been cleared. And then on the change of ownership side, we've seen something like it's about 10% there also has been dealt with as we've been going through this particular process. So they're focusing on trying to address a set of issues, and we're working closely with them to try and get the backlog resolved. We do think exploration is a critical component of South Africa, which has been unfortunately neglected for the past decade. South Africa only accounts for 1% of global exploration expenditures I talked about. And despite having a tremendous resource base, South Africa's missed out on a significant opportunity here to increase the pipeline of new projects for the sector. And this just highlights, if you just look at what Australia, Canada are spending on an annual basis, about $2 billion, we're spending roughly $200 million, which is a fraction of their shares. And so we are engaging government, and I'll come back to that in a moment. The government have indicated that they are going to drop the SAMRAD system. The SAMRAD system simply has not been fit for purpose. They have issued a new RFP, request for proposal, for companies to come in and tender on a new online cadastral system. And obviously from our side, we are of the view it must obviously improve transparency, it must standardize licensing procedures, it must be user-friendly, it must be secure, reliable, and accurate, and it must manage the full life cycle of mining, prospecting, exploration, production rights, and permits. We certainly are encouraging government to go for more of an off-the-shelf system than developing a brand new, cadastral system, which is going to end up taking too long in our view. So that's a discussion that we are having with the department. On the exploration side, so we have been saying we need to drop SAMRAD, and government have agreed that dropping SAMRAD is the right thing to do. For exploration to proceed, you need no delays on license permits. You can't have people waiting for, particularly venture capital funded companies waiting for exploration permits for what we call prospecting rights and for reconnaissance permissions. They do need regulatory certainty. There are some challenges where we have some of the regional managers still requesting ownership requirements on prospecting, despite the fact that it's not required in terms of the 2018 mining charter. And we are bringing those to the attention of the Director General. We obviously need cost-effective and efficient and reliable infrastructure and access to funding, particularly venture capital funding. And that's an area that we're encouraging government on to look at what other measures they could put in place, similar to the sort of flow-through shares type scheme, to get the process underway. So there is discussion going on. There is an exploration plan that has been negotiated with government. That particular exploration plan is within a government process. It's been through the cluster of Director Generals, the economic cluster of Director Generals. I did speak to the Director General of Mineral Resources and Energy yesterday. It's now gone into a cabinet economic cluster process. So hopefully within the next couple of months, we'll see a practical, workable exploration plan coming out from the government side, which we think is really important. We have had obviously challenges on the energy side, and it's both on two fronts, both obviously escalation in cost and obviously the impact of load shedding. What's important is the sector has obviously done all it can to reduce its energy intensity. We have had a number of smelters close, unfortunately. But what's also encouraging is that we're seeing companies doing a lot more focus on self-generation. And the announcement more than 2 months ago that the generation cap or the license exemption cap that has been raised up to 100 megawatts, I think is really an important step in the right direction. Probably the biggest single structural reform in South Africa's economy in the last 20 years, well, certainly from my viewpoint. And so we've got the first major project already going ahead. That's Goldfields, their South Deeps project, 40 megawatt plant. And we're anticipating a lot more coming in from the mining side. So at this stage, our mining companies are indicating about 2.4 gigawatts of projects that could come in, over the next 36 to 48 months. And we've got 17 different self-generation projects at different stages of evolution. We have been working with Eskom, government, and the regulatory authority, that's NERSA, to shorten the timelines on those licensing requirements. Quick chat about 4-hour mining. There is close cooperation taking place between government and the sector, and the companies are doing a lot of work through the Minerals Council and the Nelson Mandela Mining Precinct to look at what we can do on the innovation side to make the industry more modernized, to improve cost efficiencies, to reduce water usage, to improve energy efficiencies, et cetera, et cetera. And we have focused on a very much people-centric way of going through this modernization strategy. And so there are some areas that we are looking at around the establishment of a test mine, can be used for testing different technologies. We've got different sources of investment being focused on at the moment, and there is an accelerated transforming innovation focused strategy of building capacity within South Africa to restore the capacity that we had historically around research, development, and innovation in this particular space around modernizing mining. So we think this is also quite nicely linked to our strategy of women in mining, and we'll see how that particular process unfolds going forward. And then my penultimate slide, just to say that we are engaging government on a set of the 5 most critical structural and institutional reforms. We are working with the Minister of Finance, Mr. Godongwana, as I talked about a little bit earlier, and businesses having an engagement with him on further additional structural reforms that are necessary. There is already clear indication coming from government of opening up both Transnet, both at the rail and port side, to greater private sector involvement and investment, which we think is critical, as well as Eskom. And we're not just talking about Eskom, we're actually talking about investment in generation plant that sits outside of Eskom, while Eskom focuses on improving its reliability. Our suggestions to government have been around complete reform of the civil service, making it much more focused on smart tape, not red tape, improving licensing times. And there have been commitments in the Economic Reconstruction Recovery Plan announced by the President last year to reduce licensing times by half, and including water use licensing times as an example, to reduce that to 30 days from its current very long, normally 1-year period that it takes for these sort of things. We are focusing and engaging government on law enforcement. That's been a very big area of focus, and that's improving collaboration between the private sector and government, and about how we can have a dedicated mining police task force to deal with mining-related security issues. And that discussion is an ongoing process. And then finally, making sure that South Africa goes up the investment rankings, not down the investment rankings from a focus point of view. And the President has allocated the economic cluster to focus on what South Africa needs to do to improve its rankings in the World Economic Forum, in the Ease of Doing Business survey rankings, and obviously in the Fraser Institute survey rankings. And so, hopefully we'll start seeing, as these reforms gather momentum, they'll come through and enable people to see that the reform agenda is for real and that we are seeing some real progress made. So, ladies and gentlemen, appreciate the opportunity to give a quick update on the South African circumstance. We still see lots of potential. There's still a lot of work to do. We are making progress with government, and we certainly look forward to the panel session afterwards, where I'm looking forward to your questions. So, Dominic, back to you. Thank you.